Thank you for your invitation and the possibility to speak about 50 years of space law, basic decisions and future challenges. Happy birthday, Outer Space Treaty. This year in January we have celebrated the 50th birthday of the fundamental legal order concerning the exploration and use of outer space, the Outer Space Treaty. The first two space-flight nations, the United States of America and the former Soviet Union, negotiated under supervision of the United Nations successful this treaty, which was signed on the 27th of January in 1967. Of course, the treaty is not the only legal document for the regulation of outer space affairs. 4 additional conventions concerning the rescue of astronauts of 1968, the liability in cases of damages of 1972, the registration of space objects of 1975, and, with a special meaning for the Earth, the Moon Treaty of 1979 complete the legal order and create together the new legal field of space law, a part of public international law that I try to integrate and to set up in the legal education within public international law at German law faculties. But these additional 4 conventions only concretize certain articles of the Outer Space Treaty. That's why, up to the present day, this treaty provides a basic framework for exploring and using outer space. And, as it's usual on a birthday, the guests of the birthday party emphasize important achievements of the celebrating person, and they are going to point out friendly wishes and realistic forecasts for the future. This exactly is my plan for the next hour. A congratulation to the Outer Space Treaty in a retrospective view and in a future direction. Let's turn to the past and identify important achievements of the Outer Space Treaty. The first important point is the fact that the 2 spacefaring nations have concluded the treaty at all. The period of the 1960s wasn't a period of friendship, peace, and good neighborhood. There were a number of crises around the world, and no one had the idea. The most urgent matter of the time is the drafting and conclusion of a multilateral treaty concerning outer space. Unquestionably, the world's first space flights have been undertaken in unmanned form by Sputnik 1 on the 4th of October 1957 and by Explorer 1 on the 1st of February 1958. Additionally, on the 12th of April 1961, Yuri Gagarin had operated the first manned spaceflight. On the 5th of May 1961, Alan Shepard was the first American in outer space. These new developments had forced the establishment of at least basic rules for the exploration of outer space. But however, were these reasons so strong that they demanded the conclusion of a treaty in such difficult political times? The answer was yes. Contrary opinion on the status of Berlin, on the Cuba crisis, and on the Vietnam War were pushed aside for a while, and so the drafting and in January 1967 the conclusion of the Outer Space Treaty became possible. It is remarkable that a number of scholars have criticized the treaty, especially its wording. They argue the treaty is not more than preamble lyrics, because the wording is very soft, unclear and less determined. Some scholars have additionally pointed out the main reason for concluding this treaty was the expectation of the participants that the treaty would be never applied. But these scholars forget the historical context of their time. The difficult relations between the US and the Soviet Union made only these careful provisions possible. The treaty had fixed the legal status of that time. In the following years, the treaty was signed by many other nations. In retrospective, this conclusion of the treaty was a historic achievement which formed the legal order for outer space until today. Second, the term common heritage of mankind. A more recent terminology speaks of humankind, has been developed in connection with the framework of the United Nations. The term was originally introduced in the Antarctic Treaty of 1959 and later on in the creation of the space law with the General Assembly Resolution of 1963 and of course with the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. Although attempts have been made to invoke this principle with respect to technology, cultural property and the protection of the environment, the main impact of the common heritage principle remains the establishment of an international administration for areas open to the use of all states. It has been widely discussed whether it is appropriate to speak of the common heritage principle or whether it is best described as a concept or a doctrine. Insofar as it is referred to international treaty law concerning common spaces, it is more appropriate to speak of a principle, since it governs the regime of space law. No fully agreed definition of the terms exists. However, it is possible to identify three common elements, or in other words, a hard core of that principle. First, the main element of the common heritage status is the legal fact that no state shall claim or exercise sovereignty over any part of the area in question or its resources. No such claim or exercise shall be recognized. One can find this regulation in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, in Article 2 Outer Space Treaty and Article 11 of the Moon Treaty. For example, Article 11, Section 3, Moon Treaty states, neither the surface nor the subsurface of the moon, nor any part thereof, or natural resources in place, shall become property of any state, international, intergovernmental, or non-governmental organization, national organization, or of any national person. Secondly, the regime of the common heritage principle calls for an international cooperation between the states involved. The principle does not forbid any use of the relevant area, but this use is only allowed if all states act together because it is common heritage. The principle excludes the use only by one state, but allows the use by all states together. Of course, the borders between a forbidden single use and an allowed common use are not clear in every case. From the obligation of exploring and using the area in a common way follows the duty to cooperate between the states. Whether an additional obligation exists to establish an international management system is not absolutely clear. There are good reasons for this view, especially with regard to other international institutions like the International Seabed Authority and the International Telecommunication Union. But a management system for outer space in general, or for the moon in particular, or for the high seas, does not exist and is not fixed into the relevant treaties. That's why, as second element of the common heritage principle, one can identify at least an obligation of cooperation. Thirdly, the use of international common goods for peaceful purposes has always been a very important aspect of the common heritage principle. This obligation is set out in the international treaties referred to above. one may argue that this element constitutes a principle of its own, unrelated to the common heritage principle. But in general, the peaceful use is in any case the core element of this principle. Applying these three elements on space law, one can divide between the outer space tree and the moon tree. The common heritage principle was extended to outer space for the first time in Article 1, Declaration of Legal Principles Governing the Activities of States and the Exploration and Use of Outer Space of December 1963. This declaration of the General Assembly underlines, amongst other things, the exploration and use of outer space shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interest of all mankind. From there, it found its way into the outer space tree. Article 1 states that exploration and use of outer space shall be the common province of all mankind. In the discussion on the drafting of the outer space treaty, the two terms, province of mankind and common heritage, repeatedly compared with each other. The wording province of all mankind was looked upon as being more closely related to the principle of the freedom of outer space and the prohibition of appropriation. The reference of the common heritage principle is more explicit in the Moon Treaty, signed in December 1979 in New York. The treaty combines the two terms. The exploration and use of the moon shall be the province of all mankind and shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries, irrespective of their degree of economic or scientific development. This wording, the irrespectiveness of the recent status of the economy of the state in question, can also be found in Article 1 of the Space Treaty. But quite to the contrary, the Moon Treaty has got no legal relevance because only a very small number of states have ratified the Moon Treaty. The third achievement is the non-appropriation rule in Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. The rule is related to the common heritage principle and helps to realize it. On the other hand, one could argue that there is no need for the non-appropriation rule because the common heritage principle already includes the prohibition of acquiring properties on celestial bodies. Article 2 of the treaty regulates outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. Three events make this article to a highly discussed norm. As you probably know, an American man called Dennis Hope has been selling since 1996 properties on the moon. In 1980, he went to the San Francisco Properties Registration Agency and claimed the ownership for the moon and all other planets except the Earth and the Sun. He based his claim on a Landowner Act of 1862, the Homestead Act, which established the ownership of property under two conditions: the declaration of a claim before an official institution and a waiting period of 8 years. The agency registered Hope as the landowner of all claimed celestial bodies without any discussion of the legality of his claim. Hope founded in November 1980 the company called Lunar Embassy and informed the United Nations by sending a declaration of ownership, informed also the government of the USA and the government of the Soviet Union, and asked for possible objections. Since he got no answer of this institution, he started in 1996 to sell land, at first on the moon. He said, many very important persons like doctors, teachers, politicians, and other, in general, intelligent human beings have bought such properties. Although the price of such property is with around $30 for a certificate quite low, he stated himself a millionaire. Indeed, the price is too low to start serious discussion on the legality, but as a business for the masses, Mr. Hope will earn big amounts. In Hope's eyes, Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty is not a legal limit for his business. The wording states a prohibition only for national appropriation, but it doesn't prohibit the appropriation by private persons. The second event has been undertaken by the Spanish woman Maria Ángeles Durán López, living in Vigo, Spain. In 2010, she has remembered Dennis Hope and the fact that the son is still not registered yet for private ownership. So she went to the local properties registration agency, claimed the son as her own property, and got a certificate of her ownership. Then she started an auction procedure at eBay and tried to sell a part of the son with a starting offer of €1. Based on a deep social motivation, she wanted to share the expected profit with the following percentages: 50% for the Spanish government, 20% for the Spanish pension fund, 10% for research, 10% for the fight against poverty and hunger in the world, and the remaining 10% for herself. A few days later, eBay has deleted the offer in accordance with its internal rules. Ms. Lopez then started a lawsuit against eBay and claimed €10,000 compensation, but finally lost this case. The third case reflects the new ambitions of the space policy of the USA. On the 25th of November in 2015, the former US President Obama signed the Space Launch Competition Act, which includes in Part 4 a really remarkable rule. Every US citizen should be entitled to claim natural resources founding during an US space mission. All of the three cases violate the non-appropriation rule of Article 2. Although the wording only deals with national appropriation, it is the legal opinion of all space lawyers that national also means private. That's why there's no gap in Article 2, and also the USA are binding on it. Another important achievement is the prohibition of militarization of outer space. State parties to the treaty undertake not to place in orbit around the Earth any objects carrying nuclear weapons or any other kinds of weapons of mass destruction. The Moon and other celestial bodies shall be used by all state parties to the treaty exclusively for peaceful purposes. The establishment of military bases and installations, the testing of any type of weapons, and the conduct of military maneuvers on celestial bodies shall be forbidden. But there is an interesting exception in Article 4, Section 2. The use of military personnel or equipment for scientific research or for any other peaceful purposes shall not be prohibited. If one looks closer to the exact wording of Article 4, one can find smaller gaps. Although the idea of militarization of outer space has been shown in masses of movies, in cinema or TV series like Star Wars and others. Fortunately, there's no practical realization of these imaginations. Critical programs like the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, of the former US President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s stayed in an early planning status. These weeks, the world is looking to the Asian state North Korea, where the very special government, month by month, is testing new rockets and informs the world via TV by a crazy old lady on the so-called successful test. This dangerous behavior strictly leads to the legal question whether North Korea is state party to the Outer Space Treaty and has to follow the rules mentioned above. The answer is really surprising. Yes, since 2009, North Korea has signed and ratified the treaty and the additional convention, except the Moon Treaty. That's why I have to finish this point with the clear advice that the recent activities of Mr. Kim Jong-un are a serious challenge for Article 4 of Outer Space Treaty. The next chapter includes more sympathy for the space community. The rescue of astronauts in cases of an emergency in Article 5. State parties to the treaty shall regard astronauts as envoys of mankind in outer space and shall render to them all possible assistance in the event of accident, distress, or emergency landing on the territory of another state party or on the high seas. When astronauts make such a landing, they shall be safely and promptly returned to the state of residency of their space venue. These provisions of humanity are fixed in more detail in the Additional Rescue Convention of 1968. One of the legal questions of Article 5 is the term envoys of mankind. Various scholars have discussed whether this term creates a special legal status of astronauts. The proposal includes a governmental status or a status as diplomat connected with certain immunity rights. Other scholars have spoken on a status of world citizen, but without a clear reasoning on legal rights of such a world citizen. Finally, the debate ended with the result that the term envoys of mankind represents no special legal status of astronauts. But who is an astronaut? This is the second legal question concerning Article 5. There's one major opinion who defines astronaut as every person on board of a spaceship. On the other side, one can find the legal argumentation that an astronaut is only every person on board of a spaceship who has certain technical functions of this concrete mission. The difference is remarkable. Private space tourists, sick astronauts, and only in theory, benign passengers operate no technical activities on board. And with it, according to the second opinion, the duty to rescue does not include these persons. Is there no duty to rescue space tourists and sick astronauts? As mentioned before, the major opinion defines the term astronaut in the wider sense. Of course, this argumentation is the right one. It follows the obligation of humanity. And that's why I am calling this interpretation a new form of legal interpretation, the interpretation of humanity. The typical canon of interpretation methods, founded in January by Friedrich Karl von Savigny, in 1840 should be enlarged by this new method. There are a number of other basic achievements of the outer space treaty. Article 6 declares the admission of non-state actors in outer space. Although activities by non-state actors were more than unrealistic in 1967, the treaty was made for future times and provides the conditions of such private space missions. Rules on liability for accidents in space in Article 7 and, very modern for the 1960s, rules on environmental protection in Article 9 of the treaty are further core aspects of this really sustainable treaty. The beginning and the end of outer space. Space law forms a separate legal order beyond national sovereignty. That's why one has determined the applicability of this law. Space law is applicable in outer space, but there's no provision where outer space begins and where it ends. To be very clear, this is not a question of philosophy or of metaphysics. It is a normal legal question to find out in which space the space law order is applicable. The beginning of outer space is one of the most discussed questions. The majority of the scholars stated that outer space is the space directly above the airspace. While the airspace belongs to national sovereignty and is governed by national law, the outer space is regulated by space law. Because of these totally different legal orders, there is a necessity for the clear delimitation of national airspace and international outer space. For answering these legal questions, there are around 30 opinions. The leading argumentation uses knowledge from the aerodynamics discovered by the pioneer of aerodynamics and living in Göttingen, Germany from 1906 to 1907, Theodor von Karman. In the 1950s, he found out that on the basis of aerodynamics, no aircraft can fly higher than 83 kilometers. This line is called as the Karman line. The major legal community adopted this discovery and said, when the airspace ends at a limit of 83 kilometers, then outer space immediately begins at 83 kilometers above the ground. Other voices followed the discovery, also based on serious facts of the law of physics, that no space object can fly on an orbit path lower than 100 kilometers. These scholars argue for a beginning of outer space at a limit of 100 kilometers. But they also accept that airspace ends at this point. As everyone easily and without checking a study book on physics can see, both positions must be wrong. The outer space cannot begin at 83 kilometers because no space object can fly lower than 100 kilometers. And the airspace cannot end at 100 kilometers because no aircraft can fly on the effects of aerodynamics higher than 83 kilometers. It is more than incomprehensible that no other scholar in air law and in space law have discovered this conflict. But fortunately, there's only one scholar in Germany, Austria and Switzerland who holds the university teaching license in air and space law. This person, it's me, has cleared up this problem. Legal science cannot be more intelligent than nature science like physics. Both limits are right. The airspace must end at 83 kilometers, and outer space must begin at 100 kilometers. Fortunately, this summer I am teaching again at the University of Göttingen, the main university of the famous mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss. And his long-lasting spirit enables me to operate the very difficult calculation. 100 minus 83 lead to 17 kilometers. As the absolute minority, I am claiming the right position. The outer space is not connected with the airspace. There is an immediate zone of 17 kilometers. Above this new created intermediate zone, the outer space begins at a limit of 100 kilometers. The end of outer space has also not been determined. At least, the outer space treaty refers to the Moon and other celestial bodies. Interpreting this wording, the treaty is focused on all planets and stars of our Sun system. Of course, this is not a clear border, and of course, we all know that the former 9th planet, Pluto, in 2006 lost its status as planet after a really ridiculous decision by the International Astronomical Union. That's why it's difficult to determine the end of outer space. But in general, our Sun system is the limit for the application of this treaty. In the following part, I would like to present 3 future challenges of space law to you. The International Space Station, the exploitation of natural resources on the Moon, and the reduction of space debris. The International Space Station is a project of 5 partners: United States, Russia, Japan, Canada, and Europe. Europe acts by the European Space Agency, the ELSA, in Paris. There is also a formal cooperation with Brazil. After the political change in Eastern Europe in 1989, it was the former US President Bill Clinton who has invited in 1993, especially Russia, to a new common space station. The Russians had large experience on this field because they had successfully operated from 1986 to 2001 the Russian space station Mir. In late 1980s, the USA had also planned an own space station, at first with the name Freedom, then with the name Alpha. But at the beginning of the 1990s, with a very open-minded Russian President Boris Yeltsin, there was the political opportunity for a long-lasting partnership in outer space. With regard to the legal fundament of this new project, the USA used its former draft agreement of 1988 for its own station Freedom and modified it for new partners, especially for Russia. The legal basis for the ISS is now the ISS agreement of January 29th of 1998. The cooperation on the ISS is an ongoing success. The international community should recognize that this is one of the minor international affairs where the USA and Russia are working successfully together. But unfortunately, the ISS partners want to operate the station only until 2024. Then Russia wants to take the Russian parts of the station and plans to construct and own a Russian station. This would be a negative development. If you keep in mind that also China is working on its own space station, then the future of space station goes back to the 80s. No cooperation and no peaceful research under the conditions of outer space. From my point of view, it is therefore an urgent task of the international community to check whether a sustained close cooperation with a common space station between the USA and Russia is possible. A second challenge for space law is the legal debate on the exploitation of natural resources on the Moon and maybe on other celestial bodies, like the Mars. In general, there's a discussion on shrinking resources on the Earth. Who is able to offer natural resources for around 8 billion human beings? The society has to think about new sources. For instance, the exploitation of the oceans, and especially the deep sea. Governed by the law of the sea, there are realistic plans for mining on the seabed to get manganese. In the Arctic, a number of states, the so-called Arctic 5, are going to use oil and gas. Another possibility is the exploitation of resources on the Moon. And in fact, the Moon Treaty of 1979 represents not only the general legal basis of the Moon status. The treaty also includes a concept for mining on the Moon. In accordance with Article 11, Section 1, the Moon and its natural resources are common heritage of mankind. Article 11, Section 4 provides that all state bodies have the right to explore and to use the resources in accordance with the principle of non-discrimination. Article 11, Section 5 to 7 calls for an international management system and a fair distribution plan. The Moon Treaty entered into force on the 11th of July 1984 and has been ratified by only 16 states. But the big space-faring nations are not party of this treaty, especially with the argument the legal concept of moon mining is too strict and have socialist origins. Last years, there are many initiatives to deal with this mining concept and to transfer it to the present. A number of legal studies have deeply analyzed how the ideas of the 1970s could be modified for the aim to maintain the natural resources as common heritage of mankind and to organize a fair access for all states, especially those states which are not able to operate space flights in the near future. Of course, there are many voices who remark that a realistic transport system to the Moon is still missing. For present time, this is correct. But one can find serious research activities worldwide to invent a space elevator. Germany has a leading role concerning this research. The European Space Elevator Challenge at the Technical University of Munich is an ambitious forum to present progress and strategies. Although those concepts are still a starting point, the strong interest by researchers will lead in the future to practical solutions for the transport of natural resources from the Moon to the Earth. Third, the reduction of space debris. Space debris represents one of the greatest challenges in spaceflight. 50 years of space flight have left many objects in outer space. Measures against the pollution of outer space with debris lead not only to legal questions, but furthermore mark a serious problem for mankind as a whole. It is surprising that discussion within the legal community has already been raging on the topic for a long time, considering that the dangers connected to space debris can be immense. However, the legal results of this debate, if one measures in conventions or recommendations, have been quite disappointing. The legal debate, which was in present time initiated by the Netherlands and Germany, was a far-sighted one with focus on those threats of space debris. The threats cannot be discounted as science fiction theories of marginalized scientists. However, in the last few years, the discussion has increased. Although the impact of a meteorite near the city of Schladebach, Russia, did not represent a space debris affair in the technical meaning of the term, this incident elucidates that the dangers from outer space should not be underestimated. Space debris consists of man-made space objects which stopped working and have no further function. The Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, based in Vienna, Austria, was established as a permanent body by the UN General Assembly for discussing and regulating outer space affairs. It has two standing subcommittees, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee and the Legal Subcommittee. It composed a definition of space debris in its UN Space Debris Mitigation Guidelines of 2007. Space debris is defined as all man-made objects, including fragments and elements thereof, in Earth orbit or re-entering the atmosphere that are non-functional. With regard to this definition, debris only includes particles which are the product of human activity, not those of natural origin. Asteroids and meteorites are consequently excluded from this concept of space debris. Man-made objects exist in different forms in outer space. Old satellites, fragments of satellites, space stations and carrier rockets, and ruins of space object collisions encircle the Earth and form an alarming ring around our planet. The largest proportion of these fragments is made up of small, even tiny particles which arise from collision or explosions in outer space. Due to their small nature, such particles can only be recognized and registered with extreme difficulty. It is estimated that about 670,000 particles of a size of more than 1 centimeter orbit the Earth. Due to the latest developments in technology, it is possible to register particles of a size of 10 centimeter or more, of which there are approximately 29,000. The official registers of these objects are maintained at the United Nations and, really surprising, at the Technical University of Braunschweig, Germany. Other registers exist at NASA and ELSA. Space debris can create dangers for outer space itself and for the Earth. With regard to collisions in outer space, a number of incidents of collision between space debris and working space objects have been apparent in the preceding years. In this context, it should be noted that the International Space Station had already repeatedly to carry out cost-intensive, evasive maneuvers, and the crew had even to evacuate because of space debris. Two examples from the recent past. illustrate the dramatic dangers for both astronauts and the ISS. On the 24th of March 2012, the 6 astronauts on board the ISS had to evacuate in 2 rescue units because a large fragment of the Russian satellite Cosmos 2251 passed the ISS at a distance of only 23 kilometers. This fragment was recognized too late for the ISS to undertake evasive maneuvers. On the 1st of November 2012, the ISS had to implement an evasive maneuver as space debris from the US satellite Iridium 33 was on a direct collision course with the station. The astronauts activated the engines of the transport vehicle Progress M16M for around 7 minutes and lifted the ISS into a higher orbit. For the ISS, the problem of space debris is of huge importance in general. As most man-made debris in outer space is found in the vicinity of space station, it is only a matter of time before damage to a space station will lead to political and legal conflict. Space debris also creates a danger for the Earth. Because of the dissipated energy supply at the end of space objects' life, they fall off onto a lower level. If they enter the Earth's atmosphere, the largest proportion burns up. But the parts which are not burned up fall onto land or into the sea. The first serious incident of this nature took place with the Russian satellite Cosmos 954, which worked on the basis of a nuclear power engine. When the satellite re-entered the Earth's atmosphere on the 24th of January 1978, it scattered radioactive debris over northern Canada. A number of stakeholders claim that the removal of inactive satellites or other space debris would be too expensive. According to the statements of satellite producers, the production, the transport to an orbit in outer space, and use of satellite are so cost-intensive that further investments cannot be financed seriously. Another reason for the lack of regulation concerning space debris lies in the fact that political pressure surrounding the problem is still quite weak. This is not convincing. That's why in 2013 I have proposed a new Article 9b of the treaty with the following wording. Section 1. Every state party is obliged to remove its space objects that are no longer functional and other space debris resulting from its former space objects back to Earth. Section 2. Every state party has to bear the costs of the removal itself. In case of a multinational space object, the costs of the removal have to be shared in accordance with the investments of the relevant state to the space object. Coming to a short conclusion. The reactions on a speaker on space law are often the same. Before a talk or a presentation on space law, people are irritated, surprised, and in best case, interested. It is more looked as fun than as law. But afterwards, they are amazed and say, I say for good reasons, because after mankind had found technical ways to send satellites and persons into outer space, the international legal order was requested to decide whether international law should react to these new developments. And the United Nations did in the 1960s. This development was quite the same as during the discovery of the oceans hundreds of years ago. When ships were able to cross the oceans, the law of the sea started to fast. Of course, at first in the form of customary law, but more and more in written rules. The technical discovery of the airspace has led to international air law. And, of course, in recent times, the technical discovery of the internet has led to the newest branch, the cyber law. In all these four periods, the oceans, the airspace, the outer space, and the cyberspace, new technical developments have forced the creation of new fields of international law. In more concrete, new international law of spaces. And finally, I want to tell you my own message. Space law is not legal fun. If you analyze the structure, the goals, and the instruments of this treaty, then everybody will understand. Space law is a special part of public international law, like the well-established law of the sea, the environmental law, or economic law. But there is one outstanding specialty of this field of law. It opens the mind for the fact that the Earth is not the center of the universe, but only a small part of it. The Earth is also a space object, circling through the universe on more or less fixed tracks. And with this imagination, space law helps to measure the personal legal horizon in a new vertical dimension. Thank you for flying with me, and thank you for your attention.